right, this is a big group. I apologize for not having a handout. I try and do at least a plant list. Did not manage to get to that today, so sorry about that. We're gonna, I'll try and stop in areas where everybody can see the plants that I'm talking about. There may be a couple spots where it's a little bit tight. I thought I had made sure I had enough space, but possibly not. I will, if you don't hear me, I can repeat, what I've said. I would ask everybody to please not step in the beds. We've got a lot of things. They're starting to come up, bulbs and other plants. And when you step in the beds, you can crush them. You also compact our beds, and we work very hard to get them loose and fluffy. So I know it'll be kind of crowded. When I stop, I will step off the path so more people can go by. Just walk in front of the camera, spread out as best you can. And I'm pretty loud, so I'll try to make sure everybody can hear me. As always, if you have questions, please ask them, whether it's about the plant I'm talking about or something else you've noticed while you're out here. I'm more than happy to answer questions. Also, if you have any comments, if you disagree with me, if you agree with me, whatever it is, please point those out. Since we have a big group, a lot of people tend to straggle along. I'm going to walk quickly to where I'm going to talk about a plant. I will wait a reasonable amount of time for people to catch up, but if you're 50 yards behind everybody, you may miss the beginning of what I have to say. So, can talk about winter perennials, and there's a lot of things that get passed off as winter perennials. Some things that don't have the grace to die in the winter, that just look kind of ugly. Those I'm not really including in my winter perennials for the most part. Some plants that I'm sure you're thinking of when we think of winter perennials, we'll talk about. Some that are going to be maybe things that don't really cross your radar. What's a good plant for the winter? But all the plants are going to be things that have some real presence out in the winter landscape. The former director, if you knew one of the former directors, Bob Lyons, he was my perennials teacher at Virginia Tech, and he had gone to school in Minnesota, and he used to always talk about winter interest. I don't like winter interest in my perennials. But we're in the South, and the winter garden's got to look good. It's got to have something there because it's not always cold like this, and those of us who garden like to get out and get our hands dirty a little bit. So we're going to jump right to it. We're going to go down to the right in front of the McSwain building by the Cascade, so you can go either direction, and I'll meet you down there. This is the way it works during the winter. I make sure we're in the shade during the summer while I got the cold away from the sun.
You take care of it, Mark.
That's right. All right, our first one on the list is an Ophiopogon, a mondo grass. And most people are familiar with mondo grass. It's just ground covers. It's a great plant. This is one called Ophiopogon umbraticola. You may also see it as Ophiopogon chingii, which is a completely different species, but that's what this is often sold as. The Ophiopogon umbraticola is a real fine-leafed, clumping mondo grass. Kind of with young plants, you get them really curled around, the leaves curled around, and then as they get older, they get, they stand up a little bit straighter. Great plant for shade to part sun, really tough. You could do it in containers. You could do it, if you can find enough of it, you could plant it out like a ground cover if you wanted. But just real nice texture in the landscape. Down, kind of nestled in those leaves, it has little white to light lavender flowers, and then relatively large, real iridescent purpley blue fruits. Now this one's they're all in fruit right now. You can't see it very well, so it's the kind of thing that you really have to get in there close. Gardeners who are weeding around there can see it, but probably not other folks. It's an Asian species, but takes our climates really well. And out of the Ophiopogons and the varieties and a lot of those, this is one of the ones that is best during the winter. A lot of them will, when we get a cold winter like this, you'll get a lot of burnt tips, a lot of kind of ugliness to them. And this one stays pretty good. Now that gives you then that problem of what do you do with it to get it ready for spring. Most Liriaceae, I tell people, go ahead and cut it back, you know, in late winter. It looks pretty good until the new growth comes out, and then you realize how ratty the old growth looks. The Ophiopogon umbraticola, this one I generally tell people just leave it, and when you start to get too many of these brown tips, it'll be 3-4 years. Go ahead and give it a trim it back, you know, to about maybe 3 or 4 inches. You'll get a real dense crown down there. Cut it back to that in late winter before the new growth comes out. But don't do it every year. It really isn't necessary. Questions about it?
Can you repeat the name and common name?
A common name, clumping mondo grass, but that doesn't really mean anything.
Okay.
Ophiopogon umbraticola. You get a lot of things as clumping mondo grass that won't be this. Yeah, there is a label as you come by. There is a label on it.
Is Ophiopogon the same as Liriaceae?
Question is Ophiopogon the same as Liriaceae? I hear people saying no. They are incredibly difficult to differentiate. Now, some of the common landscape ones, yes, very different. When I learned them originally, the difference was one of them, and I couldn't tell you which, has a superior ovary while the other has an inferior ovary. But then if you actually get in there and start looking at them, some have a sub-inferior ovary, or, you know, so they really merge together. You can separate them out with DNA fairly well, but the people who deal with them, who are doing a lot of work with them, tend to call them Liriopogons. Because they kind of grade into one another. When you get the ones on the outside, you know, edges, very distinct. As they start getting closer together, they get more and more difficult to tease apart. So the answer is yes and no.
Any benefit to one over the other?
Any benefit to one over the other? No benefit to one or the other. You know, what's that?
This lady is shaking her head nodding.
You know, it all depends on the species. You know, some of the Liriaceae can be very, very vigorous spreaders, which is great if you want a ground cover that you never want to dig up and get rid of. My son got in trouble a few years ago. He didn't get such good grades, and over the summer he spent a lot of the summer digging out Liriaceae from my yard. So it's all coming back. So he knows he's been keeping on the straight and narrow, because he'll have to dig it up again if he does it. You know, in terms of a landscape plant, you know, if you want one, you know, just as something in the garden, not as a ground cover, there are both clumping Liriaceae and clumping mondo grasses, Ophiopogons, that are both very good plants. All right, next plant is this Aspidistra. This is one called Spectacular, but if you do a 360, you'll probably see another Aspidistra somewhere. There's another one right there and another one over there. We've been growing a lot of Aspidistras. That's common name is cast iron plant. When I learned it as a house plant. Got excited when I realized I could grow it outside down here in the south, or at least in the lowlands. Learned it in the mountains. It gets the name cast iron plant because it's tough as nails. As a house plant, you know, I learned it as a college student, and it was, you know, the one plant that was alive in some of the bars that I was in doing research. Aspidistras are a kind of a poorly understood group of plants that grow in Asia. In recent years, people have been looking at them more and more. We're finding more and more species of Aspidistra as people actually look at them a little bit closer. Now there's, I don't know how many dozens of species that you can find. They're being named pretty frequently. There's one in the corner over here, that's Aspidistra oblanciifolia, which was only, it was grown for decades and decades. It was only named in the 80s because that was the first time somebody had really paid attention to it. So all Aspidistra, most Aspidistra will be a kind of clumping, slowly spreading plant. There are some that'll just send up kind of individual leaves and runners and make kind of a looser patch. They are all kind of these strappy leaves with the parallel veins that go, run straight down there. Think of like a grass leaf, how the veins run parallel through the whole thing. Many of them are spotted. That happens in the wild. When you find them in the wild, you'll often find green ones and spotted ones, sometimes striped ones, all kind of growing in close proximity to each other. They flower at ground level. Most people have never seen an aspidistra flower, but if you get in and actually, kind of move around the mulch a little bit at the base during flowering season, you'll find some flowers right around the base, and they're pretty funky looking flowers, and often good size, inch to 2 inches across, even larger in some cases.
When is that?
It varies on the when's flowering season was the question. It varies depending on the plant. Typically it's mid-spring or so, but with some it's more summertime. And they can be kind of white to really a nice burgundy. If you want to see one that flowers a lot, come out and check out the Aspidistra ablancifolia. That's one that typically has a lot of flowering to it. And you will be just completely underwhelmed, I'm sure. But it is interesting, if nothing else. In the landscape, Aspidistras, if you have a cold winter like this and they're kind of exposed, you can get a fair amount of damage to them. On kind of the typical years we've had outside of last year and this year, they've been pretty darn evergreen. They're another one of those plants that, and a lot of these winter plants are like this, that when you come out of winter, you're looking at it going, well, what do I do? It's not looking perfect. And most of us, those of us who really like to keep things clean, want to go ahead and get rid of them. I learned a secret from Pam Baggett, who used to operate Singing Springs Nursery here locally, and that is, if you cut your Aspidistra back before the new leaves have really emerged, it will not grow as tall. So if you want the nice big, relative fairly tall plant, and different Aspidistras grow different heights. The most common Aspidistra elatior can get to be 3 feet or more tall. If you want that more of a robust plant, and you cut back the old stems, the new stems just will not grow as tall. I don't know what it is physiologically that does that, but they won't do it. So if you want them to do that, you have to let the new leaves come up about half the height half the ultimate height, and then you have to go in there and cut the old stems out individually. So, I'm a pretty lazy gardener at home. My Aspidistras usually go for several years without being cut back at all. So I have some ratty looking leaves in there with the nice looking ones. If we have a really cold winter, like last winter, it really beat up my Aspidistras. I went ahead and cut them back then. I had little short Aspidistras this year. It's up to you. Yeah. If you the big leaves, the next year, if you wait and let the new growth come up, they'll get tall again. It just I don't know if there's something about the new leaves emerging that they want to get up above or as tall as what's there. And if there's no competition, they stay low. I don't know. But yeah, that was a secret I learned, because I never could figure out why I couldn't get really good looking Aspidistras. It was because I always just cut them off at the ground. It's shade loving plant. They're once established very, very drought tolerant, but they're happiest in a moist, well drained soil. They tend to grow on kind of damp hillsides. In the wild. Questions?
In a container?
In a container, they're great in a container, yeah. You're going to have less hardiness during the winter in a container if it's out and exposed, because it can freeze all the way through, so you're going to reduce your hardiness on them. And there's a lot out there, but we tend to be right at the borderline for a lot of the species. Now, the old Aspidistras elatior is perfectly fine in zone 7A. In a container, it can get a little bit iffy, especially with a young plant. Other questions?
Mark, is that more mondo grass? A little low?
Yeah, the question was back here on the path, is this more mondo grass? This is the typical dwarf mondo grass, super dwarf mondo grass. This one will spread a little bit more, makes nice low ground cover.
Deer tolerance?
Deer tolerance. They tend to be pretty tolerant of deers. It's something that deer don't tend to go for them too much. I'm sure deer eat some somewhere, but that won't be the first thing on the menu.
I've heard that voles like the underground stems.
Voles may like the underground stems. There you go.
Toxic to cats? I'll Google it.
My experience is cats aren't that stupid. They rarely poison themselves.
Poison their owners, maybe, but
But I don't know at all. Campanulas are kind of a iffy plant for us. A lot of the campanulas are really alpine, high elevation plants. They don't like our heat and humidity. There are a few that do well for us. Actually, on the opposite corner, there's another Campanula Posharskiana, blue waterfall, which you can see is beautiful right now, with foliage. So there are some that do very well. The ones that do well do very, very well, and most of the other ones don't. Campanula garganica comes from some mountains in Italy, and it's right on the borderline here. You have to situate it right in central North Carolina. It wants a little bit of shade. It wants nice, loose, well-drained soil, especially some afternoon shade. And this form, Dixon's Gold, which has this wonderful chartreuse gold foliage, really needs some protection from afternoon sun. It will fry in full sun. And if it's in a really dry baking spot, it will die. So you do want to give it kind of a choice spot. Over time, Campanula garganica will spread to form a nice mat. Dixon's Gold, obviously with this great foliage on there, makes a fantastic winter plant because it does stay evergreen during the winter. And then in mid-spring, you get really nice blue flowers. So you get the blue against that chartreusey gold, which is a really nice color combination. There you can grow just the typical Campanula garganica. Think of it in every way the same, except for with green foliage, a little bit more vigorous, a little bit more tolerant of our conditions, but not a whole lot. But both great plants. Questions or thoughts?
How big does that get?
How big does it get? It doesn't get a whole lot taller than that. It's 4 or 6 inches tall, is about as much as it gets, and then it'll form a mat, 20, 24 inches across over time. Other questions?
Its flowers are up on spikes, though, aren't they? Kind of.
No, the Campanula garganica, the flowers are really down by the foliage. Now, some of the Campanulas, their flowers are on spikes. Some Campanulas, the whole plant is a very upright plant, and they go 3 or 4 feet tall. Some of those do okay for us, but not a whole lot of them. Then there are some that have a mostly evergreen rosette. Think of the Campanula punctata, Takasimana types. And they send up a flower stalk with very large bell-shaped flowers. And some of those do very well for us and spread very, very rapidly here. They're beautiful and they're easy to maintain, but they do spread vigorously. We'd probably give it some to you if you've been a member for long enough. You see, really all over the Arboretum, we have Aromatallicum popping up kind of everywhere. Aromatallicum is a plant in the Araceae family. If you think about spathiphyllums, the jack-in-the-pulpit, peace lilies that you have as house plants, and erasemas and those sorts of things, all in the same family. What's neat about the Aromatallicum is it comes up in the fall, looks great all winter, flowers in the spring, leaves die down, puts up a fruit spike going into spring and summer, and then disappears. Which, if you're a longtime member of the Arboretum and you've gotten a zillion plants at our plant sale and our plant giveaways, you need more plants that don't take up space all year. So the Aromatallicum you can mix up with other perennials that go dormant during the winter, the arums come up and then go back dormant when your other perennials start popping up. So you can plant them with hostas and iris and things like that, and they do great. There's a lot of variation. You can see there's some really great white veined forms. You can spend a lot of money and get some really nice named ones. Sometimes the seedlings go to more greenish than veined, but you can see, even in this little clump, you get some that are really nice veins, and then some that are more green. They're easy in a shady garden. Plant one, and over time it will, once it starts making seed, the seed will start germinating around there, and they kind of start popping up here and there all through the garden. They're really beautiful. You do have to thin them occasionally because they can crowd out your other perennials over time if you let them. The flower in the spring, if you think of a peace lily, it's kind of that what's called the spathe, a big white kind of a curving. It's not really a petal. Sometimes people think of it that way, but the pulpit of the jack in the pulpit, and then you have the jack on the inside, where the actual flowers are, and those are at ground level, but they're big and kind of greenish white, very pretty. And then you'll get a spike of bright red fruit that are just kind of sitting there, because at that point in the summer the leaves will be completely gone, and it's really pretty in a woodland where you have a bunch of these fruit spikes all through the garden with bright red berries on it. They'll take quite a bit of moisture. They'll grow in really pretty damp soils. I have found that it's sometimes hard to establish like a potted plant in really wet soils. It works better if you kind of plant it in a little bit, better drained soil, and then let it kind of seed down into the damp areas. It does a little better that way. There are a lot of other arums out there, a lot of them from, the Greek islands and real rocky, dry places. So there are some that are exceptionally drought tolerant with really dark burgundy flower spathes. So you can get a lot of, there's a lot of kind of variation in the genus. I'm on through. This is Heuchera villosa, autumn bride. Heuchera villosa, autumn bride. Many people are familiar with heucheras. You get them in all the purples and chartreuses and coppery colors and all kinds of different colors. It's this guy right here in the corner. And a lot of those heucheras with the really colorful leaves don't do very well for us. Some are great, some not so much. But this Heuchera villosa is native species. It's very well adapted to our climate. It grows a little better here, surprisingly, because often things with a fuzzy leaf like you see on the villosa really don't like humidity, but this one does just fine. Heuchera villosa is a little bit larger plant than some of the other heucheras, some of the different colored ones. It grows to about 10 inches, 12 inches tall, a little bit wider, often with a little bit of, especially during the winter, a little bit of purplish to the leaf, but otherwise it's just that nice light green that you see there. In late summer, fall, it sends up a flower spike with really showy white flowers on there, small white flowers, really quite pretty. Heuchera in general hate having leaves piled on top of them, so they want the shade, but if you're growing them in a woodland garden, you want to make sure you keep the leaves off them because they'll rot out very quickly. Heuchera villosa is a little bit more tolerant, really just because it's a little bit more of an upright plant and leaves don't mat down on it like they do on some of the really low growing ones. But that is something to keep an eye out for. It also, heucheras, the way they grow, they'll put out all the new leaves on the top, and think of like a palm tree where you get the longer and longer stem. Well, that happens with a heuchera, and that's why sometimes you'll see heucheras that are kind of laying on the ground and you can see a stem. When you see that, you want to dig that plant up and replant it with that stem below ground. It wants the stem below ground. Or you can cut it off. Often the stem you leave where you've cut it will re-sprout, and then you can replant the one you cut, that stem below ground, and it'll form new roots there. So you can kind of if you don't do that, most heuchera will be fairly short-lived. If you don't replant them every few years as that stem gets longer.
Well, that answers that. I was going to ask, why do I have such
That's part of it. A lot of the showy the comment was, why does she have such bad luck? And what I just said may be part of it, but also a lot of the showy foliaged heucheras are not using good genetic material like villosa for heat and humidity. They're great in the Pacific Northwest. They're great in New England. They're great in a lot of places, but not in the Southeast. So if you look for ones, a lot of the ones that have been bred for the South will be like, iced tea. They'll have these, or they'll say, Southern Lights, or they'll have some indication that they're a little better. But some of the other ones are, a season in the ground, maybe.
That's it.
Yeah, they really are. A lot of them are not great plants. All right, next one is a fern. A lot of times we don't think of ferns as good winter interest plants, but a lot of them can be quite nice, very good evergreens. This is Dryopteris erythrosora, the autumn fern. This is an Asian fern, although there are some American Dryopteris as well. Will spread over time, make a really nice patch. Get this nice kind of I wouldn't say it's real fine fern, but it's also not as coarse as some other ones. If you look on the back when it's in spores, you'll see all the spores on the backs of the leaves. They are reddish. That's what erythrospora means. Erythrosora is red sori. Like most ferns, it likes a shady spot, moist, relatively well drained. Once it's established, it's quite drought tolerant in the shade. It'll grow right up under trees, which is nice. Typically what you find in the trade is a form called brilliance, Dryopteris erythrosora brilliance, which the new fronds, when they come out, are really beautiful, kind of bronzy, reddish color. It's like that on all of the erythrosora, but the brilliance is just a little bit brighter, a little bit nicer plant. This is one of the easiest and most reliable ferns that I've ever grown. Many of the ferns are easy and nice, but this Dryopteris especially so. And this is another one that, it looks really good most of the winter, but before those new fiddleheads start emerging and coming out, you want to come through and cut it all down, let all that nice new fresh foliage come out.
Cut it all down even if it looks good?
I cut it all down because once you start you picking and choosing your fronds, which one looks good and which ones don't, it's a pain. Now, if it's in a woodland setting and it's just out, let it go. You don't ever have to cut it down if you don't want. I do because I really like watching the fiddleheads on ferns emerge. I like that kind of that show, that real spring kind of feeling you get, and it's hard to see it when you don't. And I also, like a lot of other plants, when the new foliage comes out, if the old foliage is there, the whole thing kind of looks a little bit, it can be ratty. Not always, but just not as fresh and clean. And that fresh foliage on ferns is so amazing, I think. It also thins it out a little bit and allows other plants to kind of mingle in a little bit easier if you do that. But it'll be just fine if you don't cut it back.
What's the full name again?
Dryopteris erythrosora. And it's I thought I saw a label.
Right behind you, Mark.
Autumn fern, that's it. I said that. Did I say that before?
Yeah.
I forgot.
Deer resistant?
Yes.
Most ferns are. When it comes to winter interest, epimediums, and this is epimedium for those you don't know, epimediums kind of fall into two groups. There are ones that are deciduous, and there are ones that don't have the good sense to be completely deciduous. It's there. It's okay as a winter interest plant, I guess. To me, it just looks like something that needs to be cut back. Too often I see people who have evergreen epimediums and they don't get them cut back before the new flowers start coming up. The flowers can come up very early in the spring, and so you either have to very, very carefully snip off stems, or you got to leave the leaves there and let the flowers come up through them and be partially obscured. So I don't consider it a great winter interest plant. Some people love it, love epimediums during the winter. When I'm out cleaning up, I'll tend to just go ahead and cut them back to the ground then. But they're on everybody's list of winter perennials, so I thought I'd mention that while we were here.
What's the species on that?
This is Epimedium Youngianum nivium. So it's Epimedium Youngianum's a hybrid epimedium, and this is a white flowered form, nivium. It's in the white garden. Epimedium Youngianum is a spreading one. Some of the epimediums are pretty tight clumpers that slowly spread. Others, like some of the Youngianum forms, spread a little quicker, and some, like Epimedium Peraldrianum, really spread quite quickly compared to others. The epimediums can have flowers anything from white to yellow to pink to orange in Epimedium Worlandsii. They're beautiful plants. Really intricate flowers. The hybrids and cultivars that are being released in recent years is really, really amazing. And they're tough as nails. You can grow them, right up underneath the trees, and they don't have any problem at all. So they're fantastic plants. Don't get me wrong. I just don't think they're great winter interest plants necessarily. Other questions about epimediums?
Do you need sun to get flowers?
No. The question was, do you need sun to get flowers? If they get a little bit of sun, you might get a little more vigor, a little more flowers, but no, they'll flower well in shade.
What are the names of those master growing ones then?
Epimedium Peralchicum and Peraldrianum.
Do you cut them all the way back to the ground?
All the way to the
Early
ground.
spring?
Yeah. If I were out cleaning up the garden now, I would do it now. Sometimes even in the fall, if I've got the weed eater out and I'm trimming and things, once things have gone dormant, I'll go ahead and just weed eat it down. Compost in place. All right, maybe the most classic herbaceous perennial for winter gardens is the hellebore. They've been kind of featured in most any list for winter interest perennials. They are evergreen. They flower during the winter. They kind of have everything going for them in terms of your winter interest. You can see there's a large patch there. Hellebores tend to be expensive. I'll tell you why hellebores are expensive. There's two reasons. If you get a hellebore and you know what it's going to look like, you have to wait until it flowers before you sell it, so you can tell people what it is, or you have to divide it, and that's very, very slow both ways. The other reason they're so expensive is because they are a royal pain to keep alive in the nursery. They will rot out in containers, so when you're buying one, you're also buying the 5 dead ones as well. Is what but keep that in mind. People always complain about the expense. Now, in recent years, there's been a lot of breeding with hellebores. There's been some getting closer and closer to good seed strains. But even when you buy somebody's, Pine Knot Farms best pink shades, they're still having they're growing them as seedlings, and they're still having to see them get them into flower and pull out the best ones for you. They're getting closer and closer to really good seed strains, though. And this is actually, you can see if you look through these when they're all in flower, they will be almost all pink. We have another patch where they're almost all white. Then we've separated them out that way. The breeders, as they breed these, what they're trying to do is get big flowers, double flowers in a lot of cases, but also outward facing flowers because so many of them hang down. Now this is Helleborus X hybridus, which is the most common hellebore. This is just the common hellebore. There are a lot of different other different species of hellebores out there. You can separate them out into two groups. There are the caulescent, which means they have a stem. You know, Helleborus fetidus, the bear's foot hellebore, that has a stem and it flowers at the top. And then the acaulescent, without a stem hellebores. Helleborus hybridus and many of the ones we grow are like that, where all the leaves and the flower stems all come out of, you know, one point on the ground. So the caulescent ones will flower on top. The acaulescent, like Helleborus hybridus, the leaves will cover up a lot of the flowers. So if you see on the end here where we had that one clump where you can really see all the flowers, all that fresh new growth, that is a clump where the old leaves have been cut back. And since it flowers in the winter, if you want to do that, you've got to cut that evergreen foliage back fairly early, by midwinter. You know, we're talking about December, early January, if you want it to be easy and not cut your flowers that are coming up. And the difference between a big patch of Helleborus hybridus that has not been cut back and one that has been completely cut back, when it is in flower, it is amazing the difference. If you've cut them back, they are gorgeous in flower, even if it's just seedlings like this where the flowers are all hanging down. If you don't cut them back and you leave them all up, it will look kind of just like a big green mass with some flowers along the edge where you can see it. So I really recommend people cut these back. You know, do it around the New Year's, January 15th. And
So it's too late now.
if you do it now, you have to cut out individual leaves because of the flowers. Now here, it's been cut. Somebody went through and cut back the leaves on the ones that were big clumps that were flowers, the original ones we planted. We have a lot of seedlings through here. It would look even better if we just went through and had cut it all pretty much across the board and let the flowers go, because you wouldn't get it all kind of mixed up and messy through there. Hellebores, very easy. They're very shade tolerant. They'll flower and spread in shade. They're actually very sun tolerant. You can get a little bit of burning on the leaves, but they're very sun tolerant. And where they grow in the wild is not in woodlands. They grow in grasslands, which is why they flower and are evergreen, because the grasses kind of go dormant and die back a little bit, and the hellebores start flowering, and they're photosynthesizing during the winter, and they're getting everything they need, and then the grasses come up and cover them, which is why they're so shade tolerant. They're very, very drought tolerant once they're established. If you plant out a bunch like we planted out here, the seedlings will just be, it's a carpet of seedlings underneath this thing. The seed don't spread far, so you don't have to worry about that, but around it, they'll just be a carpet of seedlings.
What's the time you cut them back? Late fall or in the early winter?
Early winter, January. You're good in January.
Question?
Yeah.
What was the question?
Oh, when do you want to cut them back? You just before the flowering stalks start coming up is really the key.
Mark,
Yep.
all these little seedlings that come up, can you just transplant them or do you have to pot them up?
Yeah, the question was all the seedlings that come up. Do you have to transplant them or pot them up or whatever? You're much better off. Go ahead, let them grow for a year, and then transplanting them and put them right in the ground in the fall, the following year.
Okay.
Putting pots, overwintering in pots, you don't even want to try it out.
Okay.
They don't survive well. The secret, let me give the secret, if you do want to produce them, you want to grow them in pots and you really want to produce them, the secret to have the most success is to push them hard. Fertilize them, pot them up regularly. Most plants that rot out in pots, it's, if you pot them up, they don't do well. You want to keep them in a smaller pot so they don't rot. With hellebores, the opposite is true. The faster you can push them and get them bumped up and get them a decent size by that next winter, the better off you'll be.
Is flower color true from seed?
Is flower color true from seed? Flower color is pretty true from seed. If, like here, you have planted nothing but pink ones, you'll get pretty good pinks. If you have pinks and whites all mixed up when you plant them, you're going to get a mixture of colors. Sometimes you might get something really phenomenal, sometimes not. More often than not, you're going to get white with pink speckling inside, which may be very nice. I really like that look in the hellebores.
Do they flower the first year or is it several years?
Do they flower the first year or is it several years? If you are really good and you push them, you can get them into flower. The first year is hard. If you've got a house and you keep them really going, you can get them into flower the second year pretty easily. Outside the garden, it's not going to be the first year if you just have them out from seed. It'll take a year or two.
Can you propagate them from cuttings?
Can you propagate them from cuttings? No, because for these, all you're getting is flower stalk or leaf stalk. There is no stem, so you can divide it and get some. For the coalescent ones with a stem, I've never heard of anybody propagating them from cuttings, and it doesn't help you out much because each stem would give you one cutting. If you cut that stem off in half, you've killed it. You can't kill it. You can't take the terminal, so it wouldn't do you any good in either case.
Do you know if it is used for cut flower?
They're not used for cut flowers. The question was, do I know if they're used for cut flowers? They're terrible cut flowers. They don't last. They're much better if you want to take individual flowers and float them in water. They're okay like that. If you really want to bring some inside because you got nothing else in your yard that's got a flower and you want to bring it in because you're having people over for dinner and you want them to look good, cut it, put it in water. When you get inside, burn it with a flame or like a hot pan. Set them in a blazing hot pan and sear the base. That's the only way to do it. They won't take water up well through, if you put them in water. So you seal that base off and they'll last longer. But still, you're talking about, day, not multiple days.
Fertilize with what and when?
Fertilize with what and when? If you're going to, whatever you're fertilizing everything else with, if you're doing 10-10-10 around trees and things like that, sprinkle it over them. That's great. If you put down compost, that's ideal because you're building up that nice rich soil. You can give them a shot with liquid fertilizer if you really want to push them in the garden, get them going. You can do a couple shots of liquid feed, during the growing season. That'll be great for them. So really, just how you would anything else. Again, I'm a lazy gardener. I don't fertilize anything in my garden. Between compost that I use and this red clay we have, which is so full of nutrients, I just don't fertilize anything.
Well, I am amazed. The cars, after 3 or 4 years now, and they appear everywhere. I don't mean so much just expand, invasive, but I will see a new shoot where I just can't imagine it would be. And I see this all the time. Not a complaint, just a comment.
Yeah.
If anybody wants a whole lot more hellebores, come see me.
Oh,
I mean,
man,
we
you're
do
gonna be run
actually
down.
have
Yeah. Well, sometimes when they form seed, inside here, you'll get these what they call the vesicles where the seeds are formed. There'll be kind of these like almost inflated pods. In some species, really big inflated pods, and those can kind of blow around the garden a little bit, get knocked around, so they can pop up in other places for sure. Other questions or thoughts? All right, I am going to leave it at that. Just because we have such a large group, there's some areas we couldn't get into. The winter garden, for those of you who aren't familiar, if you go back into the white garden where we talked about the ferns and go in and go to the left or just go around to the left this way, you can get to the winter garden. Lots of stuff going on there, lots in flower, lots of great evergreen things. If you take this little path right here and go up that way, kind of towards that bench you can see through there, it'll take you to another little planting where we've got another great hellebore, a hybrid Helleborus Smithii, one called HGC Shooting Star, which is a German introduction that's beautiful. The Eric Smithii are lividus, have Helleborus lividus in the parentage. So it's got beautiful foliage and it's in full flower there. And right by it, there's some galanthus that's in flower right there. And a beautiful little euphorbia called Tiny Tim that's there. That's normally this great mound of green with chartreuse flowers. And right now it's just solid burgundy. It's really, really beautiful. But 15 people would have been a stretch to get in there, so I don't want to bring everybody in.
Where are those? Follow the path now.
Yeah, if you follow this, there's a path right here on the other side of the folks standing here. If you follow that and go that way, you'll see that. The other area that I encourage everybody to go to for winter interest is the Scree Garden around the backside of the McSwain building. There's some wonderful things going on in the Scree Garden right now. Just a little bit tight for this large of a group to get through. So, weather's turned pretty nice. I hope people get in and poke around. If you see something, you have questions, you can. I'm the only Mark that works here, so you can email me. You can find me on the website. Yes.
Just one more. I haven't been here in quite a few years. I wondered if you still have resident cats.
Do we have resident cats?
We used to.
Not like we used to. There are some cats that hang around here that we have. When we can, we catch them and get them fixed so that we don't have buried under cats. I don't know. Have any of the regular volunteers, have y'all seen cats recently? I haven't seen them in a bit.
I haven't seen them.
Yeah. So I don't know if we have any right now. We had some, within the last 6 or 8 months.
Photos would be in the visitor center, their names.
Yes. No, we don't have them like that
You'd
anymore.
look for them.
Yes.
Well, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.